and gaming, Andy has tackled reliability, scalability, performance, and automation for hundreds of services on many thousands of servers. Andy is currently applying his expertise in AI and big data to real estate industry's biggest disruptor, Rex Real Estate, headquartered in Woodland Hills. He will be presenting a talk titled Blockchain in Residential Real Estate. Please join me in welcoming Andy.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to jiggle these plugs here and make sure they look like they're plugged in well. Thank you all for coming. I think our session is 40 minutes. I'm going to try to talk for 30 minutes and take some questions. If you really have a burning question, just yell it out in the middle. Not quite sure what to do about that except just live with it. Okay, so I'm going to talk about blockchain in residential real estate. First, a little on real estate. The residential real estate industry has really not changed much in about 50 years. There's a few changes, like Zillow is a change so people can see listings online. Let's see here if we can do something to improve the connection here. Hopefully that'll, well, seems unreliable. You work on that, I'll keep talking. So, who here? About half people or something, okay. So typically when you sell a house, you do list the house, which means put it into a system called the MLS, which is a sort of a database all over the country. You have a contract where you agree to pay the seller's agent 3% or sometimes less of the final price, and you agree to pay the buyer's agent 3% or sometimes 2.5% or whatever it might be of the final price. That's the core system. Now, the average fees in the US for residential real estate are 5.5%, 5.54 last time I checked. You know what the average fees are in the next 26 largest developed countries in the world? 2%. Interestingly, almost none of them involve buyer's agents the way we do. They typically have lawyers that do a fixed fee or a contract kind of a thing as a quote unquote buyer's agent. It's a very different model. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But that's the core transaction that I want you to keep in mind as we discuss some of this stuff. Don't worry, the slides are very uninteresting anyway, so whether we have them or not, it's not going to make a difference here. And it looks like we get it about half the time. So it's about a $1.5 trillion industry. That's the transaction volume every year in residential. The core technology that powers a lot of this is what's called the MLS, the multiple listings. List a house there. So does anyone know what a house listing consists of? It's very basic stuff. Photos, description, bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, lots of other details. That's pretty much it. It's a database that has that system. That's the most advanced technology that some realtors ever deal with. Some do some more advanced things than that. That MLS technology is never seen by the consumer, which is a crucial point. The data that's in the MLS is automatically published to Zillow through their APIs or to homes.com or Trulia or whatever. Trulia Zillow now anyway. But that's about as technologically advanced as some of it gets. So on the surface, there's this very obvious blockchain applicability. You might say to yourself, using tokens and smart contracts, it would seem easy to replace this MLS thing with a peer-to-peer system, where instead of having a central database, you have to pay to be a member of it, you pay to put listings on it. Instead of that, we could have a distributed database where everybody simply lists the house themselves, peer-to-peer style. Does everyone kind of understand this hypothesis, right? I'm not going to argue that that doesn't really make sense, and instead that specific things within the real estate transaction are much better suited to the blockchain than others for a variety of reasons. But let's make a brief detour and just talk about blockchain technology for a moment. So it means a lot of things to a lot of people. When I say blockchain, I mean a distributed ledger. The distributed ledger has no central authority. That distributed ledger records some sort of transactions. Those transactions may be the transfer of some sort of token that represents a real good. This is usually an equity token. It may represent some sort of token that is purely for logistical or record-keeping purposes. We'll call that a utility token. and it may have Ethereum style or other types of smart contracts associated in it, meaning you can define some logic that represents the requirements for a transaction or the sequence of steps around a transaction. That's what I mean by blockchain technology, very general, sort of general distributed ledger system. Returning to the MLS for a second, now so we have this hypothesis which I'm going to knock down, and the hypothesis is let's just replace the MLS with a blockchain-based MLS. So once again, this would mean take the system that's the multiple listing service. Come on over to this side. Don't worry about walking by me. Go behind me or whatever you got to do. Take this multiple listing service, have a peer-to-peer version of the distributed ledger, have people list their own houses in it. That's the hypothesis I'm using as a straw man to beat up on, okay? Now, why am I going to beat up on that? Well, let's dig a little deeper into how the MLS is actually used. It's a simple database of for sale. That's all it really is. Consumers never see it. They see Zillow, which has in many cases most of the set of the same data. So why does it exist? Why is the MLS needed at all? Why don't we just use Zillow? That's what the consumers are already seeing. Why don't we just put stuff straight into Zillow? The MLS serves a couple of very important purposes. One purpose, it codifies and records who are the official buyers and sellers agent for a transaction. The MLS is the system of record for that. If you have a dispute about who, that dispute is usually adjudicated by looking in the MLS and seeing whose number appears as the buyer's agent. What is the fee? People love to argue about the fees. What the fee is going to be for the buyer's or seller's agent is also recorded in the MLS. That's important. For those of you joining us late, I apologize. The presentation is being a little finicky, but don't worry. You'll get most of the slides half the time. So we've got this fee transaction that needs to be recorded somewhere. We've got who are the agents of record. Those are both things which it's very important to have a record of that are not in Zillow. So the MLS is serving this distinctive purpose there. And then finally, what is for sale? How many square feet, how many bedrooms, bathrooms? That is in Zillow, right? It's sometimes different in the MLS than in Zillow, rarely. Everybody, please come on in and just sit down wherever. Come sit in the front. Don't be scared. I won't spit on you. Not on purpose. Okay, so we're talking, for those who came in late, we're basically saying here that there's this hypothesis, which is that we have a multiple listing service for real estate, which is a centralized database. And our hypothesis is we could replace that with a distributed ledger-based system, peer-to-peer system with no central authority. And I'm going to now argue about why I don't think that exactly makes sense, but parts of it do. So to review, the MLS is really just a record-keeping system. It's a trusted third it's used for. On the surface, it seems like a perfect blockchain application. Where the hell are all these people coming from? Come on in, sit down, sit down. Some of you might want to move toward the middle if convenient, just so people can get to the edges, or move toward the edges if you're on the edges. Okay, so our superficial answer once again is replace the MLS with a blockchain-based system. Now here's what I'm going to say, this is not quite right. Business perspective, agents will not do it. There's a couple of reasons for this. They're technophobic. They're going to be totally scared to run their own keychain, their own wallet, their own keys. This would be like a catastrophic nightmare if we tried to take real estate agents and have them do that sort of stuff for themselves. The MLS is for agents. It's not for consumers. A distributed ledger system is one that the consumers would interact with directly. So it has to be based around a consumer use case. Remember, the primary purpose of the MLS is to adjudicate disputes like who's the official agent for this listing and what is the official fee for the agent for this listing. Those are not consumer problems, those are agent problems. The consumer sees Zillow, right? All the MLS does is feed its data to Zillow. So the APIs for, Zillow could easily have a tool whereby consumers input the data about their property from a listing standpoint, and Zillow would work fine for showing those listings there. Let's broaden the problem slightly to talk about some of the other parts of the real estate ecosystem. Does everyone know what title means? The real estate, the property has a title. The title itself, this is, by the way, these terms are different in other countries. So if you go to Australia, like every term is switched. An appraisal is a inspection, and a vendor is called a seller, and all kinds of different stuff. But centric here. But title is the title of the house. Now you might ask yourself, why is this a problem? Why is there, I need to buy title insurance when I buy a house? Does anyone know?
Because your bank tells you.
Yeah, but why? Why does the bank want you to buy it? Because it's possible that someone else owns the house and no one knows. And you might think, well, that sounds dumb and crazy. But if there was a lien against the house 37 years ago that everybody's forgotten about, and then suddenly someone shows up and says, look, I have this piece of paper that says I own 42% of the house. They may own 42% of the house. Title insurance protects you from those kinds of issues where the title is not clean. That's great blockchain application. Because think about that. You have a trusted third party, which is the title insurer. That trusted third party is paid by the consumer. The actual seller or buyer of the house is paying for this service. They're paying someone else just to make sure that the title is clean. If you had an unfalsifiable, and we'll put an asterisk by unfalsifiable for blockchain transactions, but let's call them unfalsifiable. If you have a record that cannot be modified, that cannot be falsified, which in theory is the promise of a distributed ledger system with good security, that means you can never have a lien against the house you don't know about, or a title you don't, some title, if everyone uses a blockchain-based system. Now, let me ask you a question. How realistic is it for all of us to switch tomorrow from having title insurance that a bank requires us to get to every single? That is probably a year process. It's quite difficult. So while it's a very, very logical application, it's not necessarily going to happen tomorrow or overnight. When the slide comes back, the second thing you'll see after liens, I'll skip liens, insurance. Homeowners insurance is another thing you buy for the house, right? So how do you buy homeowners insurance? You go to an insurance agent, you get a quote. You know, they don't actually insure your house. They're just a broker who sells you other people's insurance. And once you have that quote, you then pick one of those insurance policies from the actual underwriter, and you have insurance. Well, why do you need that broker? Why can't the insurers publish their policy quotes on a blockchain, and I can choose the one I want and record which one I've purchased on the blockchain? Again, trusted third party called a broker, who all they do is collect 5 quotes over here and pass them on to me and take 10% of the insurance premium forever. You know, that's what an insurance broker gets typically, 5 to 12. It's a crazy amount of money. You know how much home insurance is purchased every year? About $1.5 trillion worth, right? Or purchased or renewed or transferred to a new home. Enormous amounts. So you're talking about about 1.5 trillion, so about 150 billion in fees going to insurance brokers and agents. Again, they're just a trusted third party who all they're doing is passing on the offer to you. Think about property taxes. You can look up property taxes on a property. The county website or something, you can see, you know, what was the property tax paid. It's really complicated sometimes when you buy a house, because you have to decide if the property taxes are due in April and you're doing the transaction in December, who pays the property tax, or does the buyer pay part of it and the seller pays part of it? All this kind of stuff happens. This stuff isn't too complicated. It usually works fairly well. It'd be easy to record these things on the blockchain if one magical thing happened that will never happen. County tax assessors decide that their official record-keeping system is going to be a distributed ledger. That's the barrier there. That seems unlikely, right? But maybe someday. Because these are people who computers that visionary sort of people. They're nervous. I'll give you an example. Who here thinks the cloud is more secure than having your own servers? Who thinks the cloud is less secure than having your own servers? That's totally wrong. The cloud is way more secure, okay? Way more secure. You can't even come close to doing the security that Amazon or Google or Microsoft does in a million years. They have a bunch of really good security professionals. When you think of this county tax assessor's office, they believe the opposite. They believe, for example, if we don't buy from IBM this system, we will have an insecure thing.
Outside
Right.
of perceptions, is there a practical reason why
Nope.
they might?
Nope, it's totally appropriate from a practical standpoint, I would argue. Just that they're not technology forward types of, maybe one county assessor somewhere is, and there might be one that we see try it soon, but most of them are gonna be pretty slow, I suspect. Let's talk about offers. Have you ever made an offer on a house? You ever made an offer on a house? So what happens when you make an offer? Who do you make the offer to? Your own agent sometimes? And what does that guy do? He passes on the offer to the seller's agent, and then what does that guy do? He passes on the offer to the seller. You know how often that whole chain works correctly? 70% of the time. 30% of the offers are never passed on all the way. You might wonder why. Well, one reason is the agents love to deceive their customers about how much their house is really going to be worth, and they don't want to pass on an offer that might conflict with the guidance they've given their customer, right? Another reason is that it takes work, and if you know the offer is really low or really high or something that you might just not want to do the work, that is illegal. It is illegal for an agent to fail to pass on an offer. This is an example of something where the consumer could really benefit from a clear distributed ledger-based system where offers would have 100% transparency and immutability. You couldn't fake it, right? If the offer was recorded there and you had the key, you could see the offer. You can imagine a multi-party system where the agents could also see it and so on. You can have two keys that unlock something. You know, there's lots of different strategies. This is an example of something where in a straightforward sense, the offers are easy. Now let's talk about the history of repairs. I have a friend from college. She's a very nice person. She's a very smart person. Bought a house. The house had been inspected. After that, she found out that a bunch of the work that had been done in the house previously was substandard and didn't meet. Opened up the walls, they found all these structural problems and whatnot. Could that be fixed by a blockchain-based system? Perhaps. Perhaps recording the work that was done, recording the purchases. So I'll give you a concrete example from hers. The screws that were used to screw in the I don't know my building terminology, the drywall to the studs or whatever, were too short, so they came loose. That's actually a pretty easy thing because if you know that 600 drywall screws were purchased at Home Depot and they were 1 1/4 inches and they should have been 2 inches, that's actually a big clue that something's wrong. Like, where are the 600 2-inch screws that this house should have, right? So you can imagine ways that an unfalsifiable ledger of the transactions of the materials and to some extent of the labor might be able to improve your ability. It's very similar to something like Carfax. Imagine if every auto mechanic has to actually record the repairs they do on a ledger that's tied to your vehicle identification number, something like that. Carfax attempts to do that. They attempt to give you like a history of the things that have happened to your car, accidents and repairs. Doesn't always work. So most of this is not in the MLS. Why do I make that point? Because most of this stuff, history of repairs, property tax, insurance, just making a blockchain version of the MLS would solve none of these use cases, basically, right? Title insurance, et cetera. So let's return for a second to the blockchain. What situation is it good for, right? Well, we've talked a little bit about some of these examples. The key thing is, does anybody want to kind of yell out what are the crucial situations where you want a blockchain solution? What are the criteria of something that makes sense to replace it with a blockchain-based solution? What's that? Yeah, but fundamental criteria of a system that makes a good candidate.
You need transparency in your transactions.
You need transparency. That's the blockchain gives totally. It's public. It's not centrally controlled by anyone, or another way of saying that is there's no trusted intermediary or trusted third party that you're relying upon, right? Yeah, it's fast for some definition of fast. Now, let's talk about that with real estate for a moment. Today, if you're doing transactions on the Ethereum chain or something, it may not be fast enough for certain applications. It's not fast enough for high-frequency stock trading right now. Real estate transactions are slow. How long does it take to buy a house? Yeah, California, maybe 30 days of it alone, or 90 days in New York is just the escrow period, right? 10 minutes that it might take to update the blockchain is no big deal in real estate. It's the fastest thing ever. Nothing in real estate takes 10 minutes. So minutes might be monumentally slow for like buying a Coke at Target or trading stock. It's plenty faster for anything in the real estate world for the most part. So in this case, the speed of the blockchain transaction is probably another app. You might say it's a minus. So we talked about some of these things. You replace trusted third parties, you create transparency, and then the smart contract enables better automation of workflows that once again is very transparent and can be very automated once again without a central system having to enforce that automation. That's the idea of a smart contract, right? Okay, so the company that I work for, Rex, we're solving like a few of the problems, but not most of them. And I'm going to use us as an example to talk about some specific blockchain technologies. Some context. We charge a 2% fee instead of 5 to 6. Why do I say 5 to 6? Does anyone know how much it costs to sell a house? 5.5%. You can get a little discount, but typically you pay the seller's agent 3%, get little discounts on it, so it's 2%. We advertise directly to consumers. That works today, and this is back to my point about how Zillow works versus the MLS. The MLS is a system for agents, but the consumer doesn't find the house in the MLS. They find it on Zillow or on Google or on Truly or on StreetEasy in New York City. That system, Zillow or Google Search or Truly or whatever, that system is where 81% of homeowners find the house they end up buying. Right, they find it on the internet. The agent does not find it for them. In 19% of the cases, they find it for them first. Now, that's a really huge disparity, but if you think about it, people search for houses like they search for porn. They sit there all night long looking at houses, looking at kitchens. A whole bunch of them they're never going to buy. They're just fantasizing about kitchens. House, right? So the agent plays a role not so much in finding the house, but in guiding the person about how to purchase it and how to make an offer and so on. So we charge 2%. We don't pay the buyer's agent. Instead, we help them get financing. We help them buy the house, and we advertise to them directly. We started as a big data company that was saying, how can we use big data and online advertising to directly target the buyer, that buyer's agent? That allows us to then cut out the 2.5% or so that the buyer, and we charge the 2% commission as a seller's agent, basically, to the seller. There's no separate buyer's agent. We try to do a lot of transparency in the home marketing. So if you're selling your house with Rex, we have a thing that says, here's how your house is being marketed. Here's what the ad looks like. Here's how many impressions the ad got on Facebook. Here's how your house on Google, and so on, right? We do all that kind of transparency stuff that we can today. Not yet blockchain-based. We do all that transparency stuff kind of the old-fashioned high-tech way. We have a digital record of the home details. So now let me ask, for those of you who have bought, who here has bought more than 2 homes? Okay, so if you guys that have bought more than 2 homes, I saw a couple of men, so either any of you have a wife? Okay. I'm going to make a very sexist comment here, but wives tend, and maybe in your case it's you, I don't know, somebody tends to take this giant binder of crap, label it house stuff, and stick it in a drawer that no one. And that includes things like the inspection report and the contracts that you sign. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff. Now let me point out, one of the problems we talked about earlier was we don't necessarily know the history of all the repairs and problems with the house. That inspection report right now is rarely digitized. That's a big problem, right? Because that's really valuable data. If we start from that digital record of the inspection report and we periodically update that with improvements that are made to the house, replacements to, and so on, it gives us a lot of information about the current state of the house. That information you would think would be very valuable to the Home Depot or Best Buy or someone who wants to sell you stuff that goes in your house. This is part of what Rex is doing, is we're, again, not using the blockchain yet, but we're making a digital record of these home details. Eventually, we'd like that to be blockchain based, and that's one of the points that I was making an argument that this is actually, I think, one of the better candidates for blockchaining. So that,
How do you stop modified changes, or how do you stop falsehoods?
so,
I buy $100,000.
right, right.
And I say I put in $200,000 of improvement in it.
Yes.
I didn't do crap.
Yes, so we would not trust you. We would look for the receipts of the actual materials that you purchased. What's that?
I can produce receipts.
So you're arguing that anything can be faked, which I agree with. Anything can be faked, including blockchain transactions. I can fake them, right? But think about when you used a contract, they generally, when they were, say, buying from Home Depot, that transaction were automatically recorded. That would provide more information, which is essentially zero, right? So you could fake it for sure.
You're talking about the entire, logistics supply chain that walks into that home.
The inspectors, the contractors, et cetera.
Inspectors and contractors, but the
That's why I said et cetera. That means the rest as well, in addition to the two that I listed first. Yeah. Let's come back to your other questions in a moment. To get through this. Okay. So, and then this is what we do now. Offer transparency, title transparency, getting rid of title insurance. I just lost the other two, but this record of what's been done to the house. These are all important things that we think are good candidates for blockchainizing that we're working on. Another one that was listed up there, but I didn't really mention yet, is, I have to look at what it was. It's, speeding up the escrow process. The escrow process is a process where lots and lots and lots of items get checked off of checklists, but they're verified by humans and they're checked off manually. A lot of these are things like, does the bank account have the funds in it? Has the person produced this piece of documentation? Has this other company signed off that yes, this insurance is valid? Has the mortgage company said yes, the mortgage is approved? A lot of these could be recorded by smart contract. So the escrow company's servers could call the mortgage company's servers, and the mortgage company's server could say, yes, this person's mortgage has been approved, or yes, this person's insurance policy's been approved. That's a place where we think we could speed that up. This is largely a smart contract problem, right? Trying to get these things recorded, the speeding up the escrow process. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about another weird case. Is it possible to legally transfer ownership of real estate on the blockchain? So I'm going to now tell you how we can do it today, and then I'm going to tell you why that way sort of sucks. Okay, so here's how we can do it. I buy a house. I then immediately transfer the house to a trust. Does anyone know what a trust is? It's like what you have to, save money for your kids or something like that. The trust has one trustee, me, which means I make all the decisions. It has one beneficiary, me, which means all the value of what's in the trust goes to me. From the IRS's point of view, it's like I've done nothing at all. I've made a trust that does nothing except just represent some of my assets. Now imagine this. Into the language of that trust, into the documents, are written some things that say, ownership of this house shall be represented by this token. And the beneficiary of the trust shall be the holders of the token in proportion to what percentage of the token they own. So what's your name? Okay, of course I picked one that's hard to say, Inghao. So let's say I transfer 0.1 house tokens to her, right? Then what the document would do is it would give her 10% of the rights to the distribution of the trust and 10% of the control. Think about it kind of like modifying an LLC agreement or something to handle voting rights. Could we legally transfer ownership that way? Yes, we could. Because I think the level of annoyance is higher. So it's also tough for me because I keep seeing it flicker. So could we legally transfer a house that way? Yes, we could. Would it be recognized by anyone? Maybe. A court might honor that because we have a trust, which is a typical sort of a document. It's fairly clear. They would have to say, okay, we accept this weird mechanism you've made up, which is this electronic token that's representative of the house. But if someone comes along and puts a lien on the house and records it somewhere else, do we get to say, no, that's not real because it's not in my blockchain? Of course not, right? So we could do that today, and at Rex, we actually are offering that soon, which is used for people to do things like transfer ownership of the house to their children, for example, with very low transaction costs and small batches, things like that. But it's not really a substitute for having the official county record keepers think of that as the way to do it. Now, once they, someday, accept the blockchain-based transaction, then you can imagine that whole thing works and is more robust and works even in the eyes of the government. So yes, but not yet. I have a slide that says those words, not yet. We're working with a company to do this. This is a blockchain company that does all the legal stuff and the technical stuff to make this work. We're doing about half of it. They're doing about half of it. It's an interesting problem. And I'm just going to fast forward a little bit here. The vendor and sort of partner ecosystem around these, sorry, what do you? I know, I turned it off on purpose. That's what I was saying. It's flickering too much. So the vendor and partner ecosystem around these things is one of the main constraints. We have about a little less than 10 minutes left, so I'm going to wrap up anyway here. But the vendor and partner ecosystem has to change. So for example, to get contractors and others to participate in a given system. It's going to be hard to get county offices to participate. But there are some transactions that right now today in the back office, such as recording offers and giving transparency to a customer about the offers that are being made on their house, you could probably implement that on the blockchain to get use out of it today. Not really needing anybody like a county office to agree with you. So my argument here is not that everything has to wait. Some of the things are going to be hard to implement, but some of them, like our partial ownership transfer mechanism for families and like offer transparency, those are probably examples of applications that could happen right now. And actually there is a company, I can't remember the name, they're in New York, that's trying to do that offer transparency thing. I can't remember their name off the top of my head, but and so that, you know, some of that is happening a little bit. Then the last thing I'll say is that remember that this is not just a digital deed to the house or digital title. That's just one tiny application. That application is useful because you might get rid of or lower the cost of title insurance and similar, but it's just one application. There's a lot of other things here. So I apologize for the difficulty with the slides, but what this one says, you can see it, is that there's a giant opportunity here to take these giant markets, like the $1.5 trillion home insurance market, the $1.5 trillion home brokerage market, the $100 billion title insurance market, and so on, and take significant bites out of these things by making systems that are more efficient, that go straight to the consumers in some case, that offer more transparency, that offer faster service. Again, 10 minutes is very fast for title or escrow, not very slow stock trading. There's a lot of opportunity there. And I wish I could go into a lot more detail now, but from a time perspective, I want to wrap up and actually switch to answering a few more questions, if people have any questions. Yes, sir. Tell the mic, yeah.
Nice. Question about your brokerage.
Okay.
Value proposition.
Yes. Buyer. We have different people and they have firewalled information and everything.
And I guess my question is, it's twofold. One, what does that mean if you're a buyer who's working with an agent? You
Yeah.
basically just pay the agent yourself.
You pay them out of your own pocket or you drop them.
And then the follow-up question is, part of the value prop for having a buyer's agent is that he or she helps you negotiate the
Yeah.
terms. of
Yes.
that offer, not
We
just
do
the
that.
price, but all
We
that stuff.
do that for the buyers as well.
And there aren't conflicts of interest in doing that for both.
Of course there are, but they're actually less bad than the traditional system. So think about a buyer's agent today. A buyer's agent today has no incentive at all to help you, right? Because they get paid more if your house sells for a higher price instead of less. If you buy the house for a higher price instead of less. They get paid nothing unless the transaction occurs in a short time period. So let's say as a buyer you say, you know what? I really only want to buy this one if it's a good deal. The buyer's agent has absolutely no incentive to help you solve that problem. They have an incentive to push you to do the transaction now because they'd rather push you to do the transaction a little sooner. They get paid. Otherwise, they get nothing, and they keep doing work. So we have the same problems, but our people are all W-2 employees. Nobody gets a commission on the sale. Our people are judged only on the NPS score and the customer satisfaction in general. So we have a person dedicated to that buyer, and it does not make a difference to that person's salary whether the person buys or doesn't buy the house. That person's bonus is based on how happy is the customer with the service that they got. Now, of course, many people are not going to be happy if they don't buy a house, so there's still a lot of correlation, but we incentivize them in a different way. So there's still some agency problems. You could still say, well, your whole company doesn't get anything unless you do the transaction, which is true. But we still think it's better than the traditional system, actually, from an incentive alignment standpoint. Sir, yes.
Are you in communication with or in talks with any of the counties to?
I can't tell you which ones, but we were talking to 2 counties in Southern California about trying to get them to record. Right, we're starting with trying to get them to make a parallel system for record keeping that they could get comfortable with, and then eventually switch over. Her. Small number of houses have been purchased for Bitcoin or whatever, but those transactions don't really mean much. They're just like somebody buying the house for Japanese yen instead of dollars. They're just buying it with one currency instead of another. We're about to do our first partial ownership transfer transaction on the blockchain by the end of the year. Yeah. Sir.
With the energy aspect of like a blockchain, is there
Yeah.
a way with just availability zone replications that can just take care of that? 'Cause I wonder.
Yeah, you're worried about the electrical use of the blockchain stuff.
And I wonder if, since we already have availability zones with
Yeah.
AWS and Google replicating,
Yeah.
would that solve it?
So, I mean, this is a really hard thing to measure because when you think about a blockchain transaction, you have to forecast how much of that is done here and what is the cost of that energy and how much of it is done by a server and what is the cost of that energy and so on. You have to add it all up. And then you have to compare it to this amorphous transaction, which is there's still a server somewhere and there's still a web client doing something. So I would argue that it is really hard to speculate actually on which one's more or less efficient. But in general, the more that can be done in the cloud, the better. So if you treat this device as essentially a multi-factor authentication device and you do very little work here, that's generally going to be the most efficient thing, right?
So in the Rex and the blockchain and/or model, right? How do you guys solve the inspection and follow-through issues?
Yeah. So we have an enhanced inspection and we have an incentive for someone to do it. The incentive is that if you use our enhanced inspection, which by the way tells us things like make and model of appliances, very useful later. If you use our enhanced inspection, you're eligible for this buyback guarantee program. So what we do is we say that, let's say you buy the house, the neighbor plays Barry Manilow all night long really loud and you hate Barry Manilow. For any reason, if you move into the house within 30 days, we will buy back the house from you at full price. But if and only if you use our inspection. For 90 days, if anything materially wrong with the house is found that was missed by the inspection, we will buy back the house for full price from you. So you have an incentive to use our enhanced inspection, which then creates a digital copy of that. That's very important to us as a business. Another example is later on, we might be able to save on your insurance quote if we can inspect the house and prove that you have no cracks in your roof. We might be able to get you a lower quote. So again, we have an opportunity to push the inspection, and that's how we try to keep that data relatively fresh. Yeah, so 1 or 2 more questions. Blue shirt. Yeah. So we're using an Ethereum fork for our smart contract stuff where we're testing out escrow and other kinds of things. And we're using another sort of, think of it as a custom Ethereum-like thing for our partial ownership transaction. It's not, right now we haven't tied it to one of the large chains. We probably will, probably Ethereum. But. Yes, in the back. Yeah, so why do people use Coinbase, right? Coinbase is the opposite of doing your own blockchain stuff. They're holding it for you. But people use it because they don't want to manage their own keys. So we're going to offer our users the same system. We'll be the Coinbase of their house-related tokens. They can eject those tokens and have them, take them away from Rex and have them only for themselves if they prefer to manage them themselves. But for many people who will not prefer to manage it themselves, we'll offer a Coinbase-like management layer. So we then will, I used to work at Google and Facebook on reliability and stuff. Hopefully we can make a reliable enough system to not lose them. Okay, thank you everyone. I apologize for the slide fiasco. Thank you. Thank you.